Welcome to Comics Bazaar, the channel of comics commentary and arcana. This video features Fantastic Four issue number 245, cover dated August 1982. So the cover very obviously focuses on Sue Storm, aka the Invisible Girl, and we have the cover caption, "The Invisible Girl fights alone for the life of her son, childhood's end." Now I like the design on this cover. It's unusual to see Sue be the focus of a Fantastic Four cover because, of course, in this particular era, the readership of Fantastic Four was primarily male, whereas there was a little bit of a 50-50 split over on Uncanny X-Men. And I do like the fact that the three male members of the Fantastic Four are relegated to the corner box there, where they're looking down at Sue, and they look a little bit displeased that they've been relegated to the corner box. Another interesting feature is that the banner, the world's greatest comic magazine that usually runs across the top of the cover, has been also relegated to the corner box, and it creates more space for that big close-up on Sue there in the rubble at the Fantastic Four's Baxter building. So the cover is, of course, by John Byrne, pencils and inks by him. Let's open this one up to the splash page. So 22 pages of story and art in this issue. The cover caption, Childhood's End, is also the title of the story. The creator credits here are on the TV screen monitor here for the director of the Woman to Woman show. And the creator credits are written and directed by John Byrne, color coordination by Bob Sharon, so not Glynis Oliver, graphics designed by Jim Novak, so he's doing the lettering, and there we go with the creative team. So this is an interesting play on and thinly veiled allusion to the 1970s, 1980s American TV broadcaster Barbara Walters, and she is presented in the figure of Barbara Walker here on the sound stage. So Byrne here showing us all of the equipment involved in a early 1980s TV studio there. And Sue looking very confident and comfortable in the chair. And then the interview starts. So Barbara Walters, the real person from 1970s, 1980s American TV, most associated with in 1982 the TV show 2020, and also her own specials, the Barbara Walters specials. So we can imagine that that is what one of these is with Sue, and this is how she begins the interview. "Hello from New York City. I'm Barbara Walker, and this is Woman to Woman. Tonight we continue our series of interviews with the 5 most influential women in America, and here with me in the studio is Susan Storm of the Fantastic Four. Welcome, Ms. Storm," she says, and Sue corrects her. And she says, "That's Mrs. Richards, Barbara. Thanks for inviting me, and please call me Sue." So this is the beginning of some contention in the interview, and Barbara comes back with, "Mrs. Richards? It's true then, Susan," so she won't call her Sue either, "that you've accepted a subservient role to that of your husband, Professor Reed Richards." And up in the monitoring studio, one of the technicians says, "Here we go." And the other guy says, 17 seconds, a new world's record. So Sue smilingly responds, "Oh, I'd hardly call it subservient, Barbara. I love my husband very much, and I know it makes him proud that I've chosen to take his name, just as I am proud to bear it." And then Barbara comes back with, "Those do not sound like the words of a modern, liberated woman, Susan, nor does your title, the Invisible Girl." So Sue comes back with, "Really? I know who I am, so I'm not a prisoner of words or labels." And then Barbara responds, "An interesting concept. Perhaps before we press on, we should examine your role as 1/4 of the Fantastic Four. In this rare photo, we see them as they were before gaining their amazing powers, gathered at Reed Richards' headquarters." So interesting use of a little screen tone there for the black and white photograph of the four before they go up in the experimental rocket. "I hardly think it necessary," she says, "to detail the events which led to the transformation of these 4 individuals. Although their attempted flight to the stars was unauthorized, automatic cameras recorded much of it and has been widely documented elsewhere." So we get a little recap of the origin of the Fantastic Four. And Barbara Walker continues saying, "As we see in these still pictures captured by the onboard camera, the travelers were bombarded by cosmic rays. So you've got a little bit of white media cut in there in the inking by John Byrne for the cosmic rays. Losing control of their spacecraft, they plummeted back to Earth, crash landing in a heavily wooded area north of Ithaca. So that's the first time that the location of the crash point has ever been identified in the Fantastic Four comics. So this is Byrne, an archaeologist of all of the previous issues, adding little touches of extra details there, such as the Ithaca location. And then we have, of course, little inset panels there of the male members of the Fantastic Four, and details about their powers, which we know very well. And now Barbara Walker sticks the knife in, and you, Susan, gained the uninspired name and rather ineffectual powers of the Invisible Girl. Don't you ever feel shortchanged or overshadowed? And Sue responds, thoughtfully, leaning on her knee there, not especially. For one thing, my name is of my own choosing, and for my powers being ineffectual, while I can slide a molecule-thick invisible force field under your chair by simply expanding it to a column. But I don't really have to show off, do I? My record stands for itself. So Barbara there begging to be put down. So this is interesting stuff from Byrne. You know, obviously early 80s, there would have been more adult readers of the Fantastic Four, and some of them might have been critical of elements of the Stan Lee, Jack Kirby representation and characterization of Sue as a subservient member of the team rather than an active member of the team, and also criticisms of her name and so on and so forth. And Byrne is rather wittily, cleverly dealing with all of those questions and criticisms in this TV interview scenario, and giving Sue a voice that is quite agential and that is answering all of those questions very coherently and cogently, I would say. So let's continue. And then Barbara Walker, back on the ground, says, your record, come now, Susan. Anyone who studies the history of the Fantastic Four would quickly realize your primary function has been to be captured and terrorized by your foes. So this is the metatextual level here coming out in her question. But Sue responds, I won't deny I've been a liability in the group more than once, Barbara, but I remind you that Reed, Ben and Johnny might never have survived our first encounter with Dr. Doom, but for me. And of course, I did once knock out the Incredible Hulk. So Sue, standing up for herself there, holding her own. Barbara Walker here beginning to give in. I can see this, or rather, she's still kind of goading, but giving in and goading. And she says, I can see this line of questioning as a dead end. All right, Susan, what of your much publicized love affair with the super chauvinistic submariner, an affair that persisted even beyond your marriage to Reed Richards? So Sue quibbles and takes on the phrasing love affair is hardly correct. I was young and easily awed by Prince Namor, who was after all a much more flamboyant individual than my husband, by Reed's own admission. You can see here Sue's got a big defense of herself, and after Reed and I finally tied the knot, I still kept in touch with Namor as much as our very different lifestyles allowed. He's become a dear friend, tormented by his own trials and heartbreak. When Reed and I had our brief falling out, something which happens to many married couples, Namor was there to comfort me as a friend. That's the most important thing to remember, Barbara. We of the Fantastic Four did not choose to become superheroes. We are just ordinary people who fate selected to be made more than human. Unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, we did not lose our human foibles when we gained our powers, and being the Invisible Girl has not deprived me of being a wife and mother, the role I love most. So that's really well done by Byrne, thinking his way into a sympathetic defense of Sue, her name, her code name, her position in the Fantastic Four, her history. She's not apologetic for that, and she gives a good account of the fact that she affirms all those aspects of her history and her current choices. So very, very well done, I think. So they're impressed in the monitoring booth there, and then, of course, there's a complication in the plot because the producer looks out the window and there is the Fantastic Four flare. There's trouble at the Baxter building, and the TV personnel debate whether they should stop taping the interview and let Sue know about the emergency. And they decide, out of fear of their star, Barbara Walker, not to do so. Objections are swiftly overruled, and 1 hour later, the interview's taped. And you can see Barbara Walker there saying to Sue rather waspily, "Sorry you didn't feel you could be completely open with us tonight, Sue. I suppose it's only to be expected, knowing your husband will watch the show." So Sue just laughs wryly to herself, or sighs wryly to herself, and thinks, "Think what you want, Barbara. I've got nothing to feel guilty about." So then she hails a taxi back to the Midtown Manhattan Baxter building, but she can see immediately something's awry. The lights are all out, and her belt buckle won't work on the lift up to the private quarters of the Fantastic Four, so she recognizes something's wrong. I've got to get up there, and she uses her force field to take her all the way up to the top of the skyscraper building. "Now I am worried," she thinks to herself as she steps off the force field platform. "Reed realized we'd be especially vulnerable to attack while replacing our top 2 floors. So that's after Terax destroyed them a couple of issues ago. He built enough auxiliary alarms into the construction area to wake up all New York, yet my presence isn't triggering any of them." So I do like the fact that Byrne is thinking through what kind of decisions Reed Richards would make in the wake of the reconstruction of the top 2 floors, and not neglecting security either. So that comes through in the story here. So Sue makes her way down to the residential quarters of the building, but everything is so still, and I'm not used to moving around the building in the dark, she thinks to herself. And then she sees Reed's stretched hand, so he's unconscious on the floor. He's alive though. Also the Thing is in the same condition. So Sue thinks to herself, what could have knocked them out? Especially Ben. He's no weaker now than he was before Reed's last attempt to cure him turned him into a less evolved version of the Thing. Wait, there's a light ahead in the visitor reception lounge. So she slowly makes her way in, flickering light and heat. It's Johnny, she thinks to herself. Really like the effect here for Sue being invisible. You get to see Byrne's art in black and white, and his use of an ink brush for the spotting of blacks on Sue's figure, translucent figure there. And then we get a full page image of this stranger who has improbably the Human Torch by the throat and is asking him, "Why do you persist in prolonging your agony? I sense you've the answer I seek. Do not force me to empty your mind as I did the others." And Johnny responds, I don't have your answer. I don't even know the question." The stranger's mellifluous voice cascades across Susan Richards, a heavenly choir embodied in one man. Yet she senses an alien quality to the voice, a great sadness, a longing that brings her heart to her throat. So who is this figure? And he uses his power here to get his answer from the Human Torch, but finds nothing. So throws Johnny into the dividing wall there in the apartment. For several seconds, after tossing the limp Human Torch, he stands in silence. Then a cry tears itself from his lips, an awful, anguished cry that stabs through the invisible girl like a hot poker. So why is Sue having these really deeply felt reactions to the voice and distress of the stranger? Well, we'll discover shortly. Startlingly, the stranger reacts as if Sue had spoken aloud when she thinks to herself. He sounds almost like a child having a tantrum. Who is he? You, it is you, the fourth member, the female. The answer lies within you, I sense it. So she's shocked by the fact that he can see her even though she's invisible. Let's continue. Things are getting pacey now. And, Sue is going to have to deal with this solo without the aid of the male members of the Fantastic Four, which is intriguing coming on the heels of Barbara Walker's aggressive interview with her. So the stranger protests, "Stop, you must give me the answer." And Sue runs, dropping her handbag. Whatever else I may have said to Barbara Walker, she thinks to herself, I do have a limit to my powers, and against someone who could so easily defeat the others, I'm going to need some high caliber help. So she comes up with a tactic here where she wraps her coat on his head so as to blind him and slow him down a bit. It worked. Now, if it will only hold him long enough for me to get to the communications room. So she's going to call probably the Avengers. But the guy comes after you. You cannot escape. Why do you persist in running? And he turns her coat into a costume for himself. So much for that trick. Let's see if an invisible force field will work any better. So he runs into it initially, but he's determined she shall not succeed. His fingertips barely brush the surface of the field, but a dagger of indescribable pain burns into Sue's skull. So you can see the way that Byrne has illustrated her neck snapping right back there. That's really well done. It conveys the physical pain she's in, and also those wavy ink lines emanating from her head. So she thinks to herself, feedback, he's turning my energy flow back on me. I must drop the force field. This is good stuff. Let's continue here. 6-panel grid. Interesting. Enough of this foolishness, exclaims the stranger. You try my patience. Give me my answer now. So Sue is thinking all the time. He keeps harping on the answer, but he never mentions what the question is. And yes, there's something familiar about him, his voice. But no time to worry about that. A gesture and an invisible hailstorm pelts the tall man. She runs again. This isn't going to work at all. I'm just slowing him down long enough to get one room ahead each time. I've got to get my breath. Time to think, to plan a decisive move. Then as she races through the residential level, she arrives at Ben's apartment. It looks as if it's exploded, and that's where Ben was babysitting Franklin. So now she thinks of her baby. Where is he? He's not there. There's the robot, babysitting robot Hubert, designed by Reed Richards to monitor Franklin and whether his mutant powers would ever manifest. It's exploded, and there's no sign of Franklin, she thinks. What has that man done with my son? And then he reaches out to touch her, and she tries another trick. Turns his hand invisible. Lucky girl, she thinks to herself. I didn't expect that one to work. And now he uses his power to stop her once again. Meanwhile, back at Television City, Barbara Walker there is reviewing the interview. I think we can cut entirely the sequence when she says, probably Sue saying something good to one of Walker's questions. And then one of the guys runs in, boss, quick, have you seen Channel 2? So she's there tartly responding, I'm hardly likely to be watching the competition. Smitty, this had better be. And then the newscast, unidentified forces, which seems to be filling the air around the tower complex of the Baxter building, which we can see on screen there. And so the news van shoots out into the New York traffic. 6 minutes later, a television news mobile unit skids through rain-slick streets bound for the Baxter building, and Barbara Walker is sitting in the van too. This couldn't have worked out better, she says, if I'd planned it. Now we'll have footage of Miss Smartmouth Storm doing her impression of a fifth wheel. So aggressive from her. Looks like the cops aren't letting anyone through the cordon though, so they have to get out. And she's full of herself here, ordering the cops around. I don't think you fully realise just who it is you're dealing with, Captain. I'm not some 2-bit newspaper goon you can order around. So he tells her that she's going to have to stay there for her own safety. Now you listen to me, she exclaims, with her hands on her hips there. Good acting in the art from Byrne. Unless you want to be pounding a beat this time tomorrow. But her team member there says, oh my gosh, look up there. Another big explosion from the top of the Baxter building. There's going to have to be more construction work. And Sue ends up emerging from the explosion, sealed within an invisible force field bubble. Sue Richards is hurled far into the cool spring air. Far into the cool spring air. High into the cool spring air. So something's gone wrong there. But anyway, the force of the blast, she thinks to herself, is subsiding. I'm starting to fall. So she uses her powers to slow her fall and land safely on the ground. Let's get past the advertisements here. And, you know, she thought she'd gotten away from your one Barbara Walker What in heaven's name is she doing here? So she's there and she says, all right, Susan, we all saw you running away from the fight. Where are the rest of the Fantastic Four? So Sue, she's still diplomatic. Barbara, I don't have time to explain all this. You are all in great danger. All of you. You have to get away. But Barbara Walker, just not helpful at all. Don't you order me. Full of herself. Vain. She halts, frozen in mid-thought though, as a sudden numbness seizes them all. And out comes the stranger and levitates to the ground. The one who resisted me stands with another female, he says. Somewhere within all these gathered people I must surely find my answer. Yet, to see two women like this, side by side, something within me stirs, feelings I cannot comprehend. For the dark-haired one, I feel strange emotions, and for the other, emotions similar, yet subtly different. Different in a way I cannot understand. There's so much I do not understand. So Sue is there thinking to herself, what's he talking about? And the familiarity of him, his phrasing. So he says, you must tell me what I want to know. Tell me why my mind is so barren, so empty of experience. I sense it should not be so. I sense my mind should be filled with thought and memory. And here's his question, his big question. Tell me who I am. And Sue initially is confused, but I don't. And then she realizes with horror, oh no. Realization blooms like a dark rose in Susan's mind. Suddenly she knows why the tall man has seemed so hauntingly familiar. It is Reed Richards she sees behind the golden beard, and the voice, though altered, is Franklin. It's her own son. And how on earth is it that he's in adult form? He staggers back as if physically assaulted. Memory explodes across the emptiness within his skull, sweeping him away, drowning him. So he realizes now, Franklin, yes, I'm Franklin Benjamin Richards, but I'm incomplete, I'm not whole. Why am I so empty? Where's my life? And this is a touching little scene here written by Byrne. Don't be afraid, Franklin, I'm here, Mommy's here. And so he responds like a child, Mommy, what's happened to me, Mommy? That's very good by Byrne. You wouldn't expect that from him. But in any case, the voice is suddenly that of a little boy. We don't need that. We don't need that caption. Try to remember, Franklin, she says. If you'll only remember what happened to you, maybe I can help you. And so he says, head in his hands. It's so vague, so muddled. I was in Uncle Ben's apartment. I remember you going out. So this brings us to the end of the previous issue. I remember Uncle Ben giving me a puzzle to play with, the Rubik's Cube. It was hard, so I made it right. That was a use of his mutant power, which Hubert should have recognized and sent an alert to Reed. Then someone said, the TV program, I think it's Leave It to Beaver. When are you going to grow up? And everything changed. I felt my mind expanding, felt my body swell. There was an explosion. And there goes Hubert. And I don't remember anything until I found myself fighting Daddy and Uncle Ben and Uncle Johnny. I couldn't remember who they were or who I was. I tried to reach out into their minds, but none of them recognized me. So they've awoken from unconsciousness and out they come, ready to fight. And Sue explains, Reed, no, it's Franklin. Look at him, listen to him, it's your son. And then Reed recognizes that it is indeed. And I like that expression on his face. That's well done by Byrne. Franklin, oh dear heaven, it is you. So now we're coming to the wrap-up of the story. This is astonishing, says Reed. We must get Franklin into the Baxter building. I have to examine him. The rigors of accelerated aging could be killing him even as we speak. And Sue says, oh no, I hadn't even thought of that, Reed. Is there some way to restore him to normal? And Reed says, without a detailed analysis of the transformation, I simply cannot say, my darling, but the simple fact remains that we must find some way of restoring him to infancy, although that may create other problems. And Sue says, I'm not certain I understand, but Franklin does. I do, he says. I have Daddy's scientific knowledge. My powers should not have become fully functional until I was mature enough emotionally to deal with them. Artificially grown up, I have my adult power, but still a child's interpretation and reaction. And, Johnny kind of says to the thing here, man, that's weird. He sounds like Reed, trying to talk like a little kid. It must be like zoo time in his head. And the thing responds, probably no worse than in yours, hotshot. And then Alicia arrives. So she saw the situation on the TV news. And this presents an interesting possibility for Franklin before he is returned to his child's form. So he says here to Reed, "I think I know what has to be done, Daddy. With my power, I can do anything. But first..." So the thing there is saying to Alicia that he's fine. And Franklin says to the thing, "Uncle Ben, you are as you are now because of a failure in my father's last attempt to restore you to human form. So that's a few issues ago. I have the power to undo that failure and make you Ben Grimm once again." So the thing says, now listen here, mister. I'm sick and tired of all these half-gassed tries at making me a man again. The last thing I need is somebody with a 5-year-old mind trying. But Franklin says, "You resist? I do not understand. I thought your greatest wish was to be human again. Let me reach into your mind." And so the thing doesn't agree to that, but in his mind, Franklin sees the truth. And though Franklin's accelerated psyche does not possess the emotional maturity to comprehend the complexity of feeling he finds in the thing's mind, his child's innocence nonetheless holds enough experience to recognize there is far more to this problem than might be guessed. Instinctively, he reaches out for the mind most like his own, and Reed Richards feels a cold dread close about his heart as the truth is brought terribly home. So Reed understands what's going on. Franklin uses his power. The glow spreads from the child man's being, a spidery silver thing that grows in size and intensity with every pulse. And as it grows, its center seems to shift subtly until the heart of the shimmering nimbus swirls around the confused thing. So we have the transformation of the thing back into his rocky orange self. "Holy cats," he exclaims. "He's made me all rocky again." That's a great anchor image. But I like the visualization of the transformation as well. I think that's really, really well done. Note too, as we get to the end of the issue, there's no backgrounds here. We don't need them because we know where they're located, but this is speeding up the process of drawing these last few pages for Byrne. Let's continue to the end, the very last page. You can see here only one panel with a little bit of background there. So maybe there was a rush to the printers on this one. And the thing is not the only one changed. So Franklin has turned himself back into a 5-year-old. His mother picks him up. And the thing is confused. And what about me? He was talking as if he was going to make me human again. So Reed is diplomatic here. I think I can explain. Franklin communicated to me telepathically what he intended to do. As I said, Franklin's released power was too much for his underdeveloped mind and body, so he put psychic dampers up in his brain. His power will return only when he's old enough to control it. As for you, Ben, and this is where Reed is circumspect, tells a white lie. He could not actually cure you, so he put you back in the condition you were in before my last failure. Now at least the potential for a cure exists again. So the thing is satisfied with that explanation more or less. "Well, that's better than a poke in the eye, I guess," he says, "but not by much. Come on, sweetie, I need me a cup of Java." And Sue asks, "But Reed, didn't Franklin say his power was capable of anything? Why couldn't he cure Ben?" "He could have, Sue," says Reed, as Ben walks off with Alicia, her hand around his back. "But when he reached into Ben's mind, he discovered something I failed to consider in all my attempts to cure the thing. Ben has said many times he fears Alicia loves him only as the thing, and although she's denied that in both word and deed, it is a deep-rooted fear. Had Franklin cured him, it might well have caused Ben severe trauma. There is the tragedy. The beautiful, blind Alicia is the one spark of joy in Ben's life." Well, I mean, I think he also has a bit of joy in the family, the Fantastic Four family, and his is Franklin his godson, or kind of sort of in a way. Of course, Ben is Jewish. I don't think that was revealed at this point, but anyway, you get the point I'm making. Yet, so long as he loves her, his mind will reject all cures. So long as there is Alicia, he will always be the thing. So maybe this is the explanation for why Reed's last attempt went wrong, that Ben was subconsciously resisting the transformation back to fully human form. But why then did was the relationship between them so good, between Alicia and Ben so good in Littleville? You see, that's the trick of it there. That's the kind of the knotty element of this. But this gives us the Rocky thing back, and no more attempts to transform the Ben back into his human self. At least no more attempts without a course of psychoanalysis for Ben. So there you go. So that's a really interesting issue, you know. Byrne doing new things, bringing Franklin into his adult body form there, and exploring some of the criticisms that were leveled against Sue Richards, the Invisible Girl, as well, by readers, and in the comics fan press as well, by readers who were no longer children but adults, and looking at these characters and wondering about their depictions and characterizations. So a very, very good issue by John Byrne, I would say. One page of letters there about issue 240. And there you go. I do hope that you enjoyed my review and commentary of Fantastic Four issue 245. Let me know your thoughts on this one in the comment section. If you enjoyed my review and commentary, please like and share the video, as it really does help the channel. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more content like this.